You might think it's maybe because you might think it's because the beaches are beautiful, which I'm sure it's true in your area. But by and large, I think living near the coast these days has another advantage, which is probably the reason why coastal development is so strong. And that is given by the next slide. So this slide shows you the ship traffic, the commercial traffic. And I think it's no surprise to you that 90% of the goods that are part of the global economy get transferred by ships. And again, you can see the Brazilian coast also full of ship traffic connecting you guys to the US, Latin America, also Central America, but also Europe and other parts of the world. And I think it's this signature of globalization, global trade, that really the ocean is connecting us in many different ways, not only as an ecosystem, but also for commercial activity. And if you live near the coast, you can partake in the global economy, which is a huge advantage. So I'm going to take that perspective now and look at where people actually live. So, and again, you can see these are bigger settlements, and you can see again that many people do live near the coast, but this picture does look a little different to the one before. For example, you see the strong amounts of people living in India and Nepal and, you know, south of the Himalayas, but also China, Japan shows up much more prominently than in the picture of the lights emitted. Now, when you put some numbers on this, what you will find is that on our planet, when I was born in the 60s, there were 3.5 billion people. And by now we have reached, so we're somewhere over here now. So we've reached 7 or 7.5 billion by now. But you can also see how that will develop over time. And I think the best projections from the UN experts on world's population is that we're probably going to reach maybe 10 or 11 billion at the end of the century. So what is interesting, in my lifetime, we doubled. We went from 3.5 to 7, and we're not going to double again. We're not going to go to 16. And the reason is because probably the planet is not capable to do it with us, but also because there are some limiting factors that have to do with lifestyle and people's willingness to how many children they have, but maybe also pandemics would play a role. And if you look at this lower bound, I would have always said, well, it's maybe if a world war or a major pandemic. And I said, both of them are not very likely, but I guess we're in the middle of one, but fortunately not that many people are actually dying, which is, I think a good thing. But then if in Latin America or South America, you'll be on this blue trajectory, you'll see some growth. If you live in Europe, where I live, there's not much change actually. But if you live in Asia, this is where the huge development has happened over the last 30, 40 years. And if you look into the future, Asia will actually level off, but it's actually Africa as a continent where the biggest growth in population is expected. And that's an interesting dimension also for ocean sciences, to see where the development challenge, where the need for ocean information, ocean solution is probably largest in the coastal regions, but also probably around the continent of Africa. So let's keep moving. And so you take this into perspective, and then you think about, wow, a lot more people, and we only have one planet and one ocean to go around. So that finiteness of the ocean and the planet is an important element. And that led to these concepts and ideas that the human development probably needs to much more so respect our planetary boundaries. That is true in Brazil, that is true in Europe, but also globally. And these ideas of planetary boundaries with climate change, biosphere integrity, land change, freshwater use, but also things like ocean acidification or stratospheric ozone depletions are just one of those examples that just shows that there's a certain areas that we can develop into which are probably seen as unsafe. And the loss of biodiversity is certainly one of them. And climate is another area where we're probably about to get into the unsafe territory and so on. But on the other hand, that's the outer dimension of our development opportunities, and the ocean is no different to that, is a finite development option. And in the inner circle here, this is where people are. You and I, your colleagues in your part of the world, and the people want access to water, income, education, resilience. They want to have a voice, jobs, energy, social equity, gender equality, health, and food. So this is the human element to it. As you get more people on the planet or in your region, and you have a finite outer edge, this safe and just operating space for humanity is getting thinner and thinner. So, and the scientific question for us in the ocean sciences in general is, so then what is the safe and just operating space for humanity today, in the next decade, and maybe at the end of the century? These are really challenging and exciting questions, possibly one of the most important questions for humanity in the coming decades. Now, the global system in the politics, they've sort of captured this in their own ways of dealing with it. And in 2015 was a landmark year where on the one hand, we agreed to the Paris Agreement, which many of you probably know, but we also agreed to these Sustainable Development Goals that I speak about in a moment. But there was also a major meeting on reducing disaster risk, so exposure of people to disasters, and also the urban agenda, recognizing this growth in population, which is a lot happening in the urban space, and Brazil certainly is no exception to that. But I'm going to focus a bit more on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which kind of captures some of these global motions, and 17 goals were negotiated. I can talk an hour about how they came about, and I'm pretty proud that we do have a goal that focuses on the ocean, the SDG 14, but I think I'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. Because that goal focuses on elements of the ocean, but we did some analysis in a study that was supported by the International Science Council that came out a few years ago, and it looks at these interactions between the goals. And what you find out is that the ocean dimension of this 2030 agenda is not just in the goal 14, but it's really around the other ones as well. And some are more closely connected, for example, no poverty with food supply, maybe water a bit more distant, but climate, biodiversity, and so on. So there's an interesting study about the connectedness of the SDGs and how the ocean in particular plays a role. So I'm always warning us as marine scientists to not get boxed into goal 14. The ocean is a much wider exposure to a 2030 agenda. Now, I want to switch gears now and talk a bit more strategically. So what does that mean for the science system? So many of you and many of us are working a lot on understanding the human pressures on the ocean and climate system. So we talk about things like sea level rise, warming, ocean acidification, loss of oxygen, pollution here in the picture of plastics and alike. And many of the people almost get tired of the kind of things that we say. They say, oh, Martin, you're always talking about bad things, right? My life is hard enough, and now you tell me one problem after the other. So, but it is important to actually understand and articulate the pressures on the ocean system, but I don't think that is all that we do. And I don't think that is all that you do there in Brazil. There's a lot of science that is focusing on what we might call resilience. So it's about what kind of ocean and coastal system do we want that is resilient to stressors like warming, heating, sea level rise, that is resilient to human interventions and helps maybe with carbon capture. So restoration, resilience, capturing that elements of the ecosystem that allows the ocean to deal with the stressors, but also the humans to adapt to them is another big part of our science. And at the end of the day, I think what our mission is, or what our society is expecting from us, from the marine scientists, from the climate science, is to help them to understand how the ocean can help us to be a prosperous in society. So these are these agenda of blue-green growth, sustainable ocean growth, jobs from the ocean, really supporting from the ecosystem side, the ocean supporting us in humans in a sustainable way. So a lot of what we do is actually to safeguarding prosperity, but understanding the pressures and understanding resilience is sort of a part of that. So let me take this a bit more specifically, how we address that at home. So here in Kiel at the university, we have put together a network, what we call Kiel Marine Science. Is a center for interdisciplinary marine science, and it connects actually all the faculties that we have, from engineering, business, economic sciences, certainly the natural science is a big player, but also agricultural and nutritional science, arts, humanities, medicine, law, and even theology. And so that is the university piece of it. Then where I work is at GEOMAR, the Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research. So this is a more research organization supported by the federal government, rather large, and certainly we focus on the natural ocean sciences on a lot of different elements, from climate, biodiversity, biogeochemistry, geology, and the like. Then we work with the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. So it's an institute that focuses on the economic development of Germany, nationally and internationally. And we also have a Leibniz Center for information in the economics, used to be the library. So these are two economic centers that we work with. And last but not least, we also work with the cultural and the arts and the practicing arts in our network. So it's really, as you can see, a large multidisciplinary network that tackles these large questions of the ocean and sustainable development. So let me just give you some ideas how we go about that. So on the one hand, I think it's still essential for marine scientists to really state that a large part of the coastal and the ocean is still to be discovered. So we're not at the state that we know everything. We're still discovering new species, new elements, new processes of the ocean and climate system. But I think for many of us, what we're doing at universities, we're really trying to focus on understanding. So we're taking that discovery, put it together, develop sometimes models, sometimes theories, sometimes concepts, ideas, how the ocean system works as a system. Then we take that understanding and turn it into what we call assessments. So we take that understanding, which is very often a very much of an expert understanding that we share around the world in university settings and academic settings, but make that what we know available to our societies, to our partners in society, often through assessments. Here, some of them, I could have mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change is another assessment there. And last but not least, I think our society is looking at us in the academic circles for solutions, which could be around, let's say, microalgae, marine protected areas, use, artificial upwelling, what have you, different types of interventions, solutions, use of the ocean that support that prosperity as well. So that gives you a kind of dimension around that. And how do we go about that? So we have topics that we advance. So there's a topic around ocean food. I'm not going to go into the details. There's a topic on ocean floor resources, the various elements there. We have a topic on ocean pollutants of various types. We have a topic on resilience or disaster. So thinking about how disasters of the ocean can affect humans and how can we use that understanding to promote resilience. We have topics around recovery, so thinking about assisted evolution or really helping the ocean to support us in an ecosystem services sense. And last but not least, how do we think about, how do we talk about, how do we explain the ocean to ourselves, to our colleagues around the society, an area that we call ocean narratives. So you see there are very different type of areas that we do some work on. Now I'm going to introduce to you the way in which we think about that. And so here's a simple graphic that I've developed a few years back. And it's not perfect, but it kind of connects a bit in what we do in the scientific world. So we do observations and mapping, as I said, the discovery element. Then we do the understanding, often at the process level. We put these things together, and then if you get lucky, we can put it into predictions and models. All of this is done largely in the scientific enterprise at universities using our own norms and metric, and we write papers. But quite often our societal partners cannot even understand the title of some of the papers that we're most proud of. So this is expert kind of work. It's very important. But then it's important to translate or to co-design that also with those who want to use that. So assessments, informing is very important. And then only then are we able to use that knowledge to support governing, governance aspect, acting aspects, solution aspects. These is not academics. This is the work of society. So there's an important interaction. Very often, those who have to make decisions go back and say, look, Martin, we don't know enough. Look at your university, go back and give us more information. So it's really a circle where each of these things get informed. And unless you have all of these elements somehow working, I don't think you're going to get a lot of action on the ground if you don't really have these elements working with each other. So I'm going to go through some of the elements. Observing, it's really exciting times to be an ocean scientist. We have so much opportunities from observing the ocean from space, from inside, in situ, new technologies, really, really exciting opportunities. And I'm thinking a lot about how we can take these wonderful observations and more of those and really connect them through the data lenses, through data opportunities to those who want knowledge and share the knowledge with us. That could be citizens, decision makers, and alike. And quite often, we introduce this concept of what we call this digital twin. So here's some European institution that I'm not going to go into, but we're observing systems, space in situ. We have marine service systems from the government. We have data networks. We have cloud set of systems, and then we have citizens. And this connectivity can be done in the framework that sometimes we call digital twins of the ocean. So we're harnessing the power of the digital revolution of that. And what that frame is all about, and here's an example of a decade program that's called Ditto. And what we're really working together with all of you, and I hope we will train you, is how can we really get all that knowledge, the marine data, modeling, simulation, high performance, algorithms, artificial intelligence, to really harness that power and to create ocean-related development scenarios using that digital understanding. And let me show you what I mean by that. Observing systems have a particular logic. I'm going to show that in a moment, and digital twins have a slightly different one. In observing system, we say, there's needs of society for safety of operation near the coast, let's say tsunamis or harmful algae blooms, shipping, harvesting, and things of that, tourism and alike. And we say these services needs information, and we have observing networks, we have data systems, we have forecast systems that serve the societal needs. But these services tend to ask questions like, what is the state of the ocean today, and how will it change tomorrow? Really doing predictions, assessments, informing decision makings. In twinning, it's almost the same, but not quite. You also have observation, sensors, and models, and visualization. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to replicate the real ocean with a digital version of that. And that digital version then allows you to ask questions like, what would happen if we did this intervention? What would happen if sea level rises? What would happen if climate change is unabated? So it's these what if scenarios, I think, that this digital twinning allows us to do. We know some of these results from Earth system models with certain societal pathway scenarios in the climate community, but we can do things like that also in the ocean community with certain ways of harvesting the ocean, using the ocean, protecting the ocean, and the like. So in many ways, what we're trying to do collectively is to understand and look at how our relationship with humans with the ocean is. I would say today it's not very sustainable. I think the 2030 agenda is giving us some guidance how we could become more sustainable in our interaction with the environment, ocean included, different pathways, but really where we want to be long-term is in this safe and just operating space. And what are the pathways from where we are today, largely unsustainable, to this more sustainable world? I think that is a very exciting research challenge that needs all the elements of sciences that you have in your university, and that we can work together globally. So a few more points to bring that home from this point of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So what is that? So that agenda that I just played out to you is certainly something that has received a lot of attention at the international level, and now is enshrined in an activity that we call the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And the vision is to highlight the science that we need for that ocean that we want, that safe and just operating space. And the mission really is to really empower the transformative ocean science solutions for sustainable development. So not business as usual, but change how we interact with the ocean, how we manage humanity and its interaction with the ocean. And we're doing that so by connecting people in the ocean in new and innovative and sustainable ways. Now, the decade has articulated 7 areas of the kind of ocean that we want. So we want a clean ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a productive ocean, a predicted ocean, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, and an inspiring and engaging ocean. So these are the kind of objectives. But we're scientists, we say that sounds great, but what do we do about that? And for that, the decade has outlined 10 challenges, which I think are also something that almost guides your program. So it's understand map, land and sea-based source of pollutants and contaminants, to understand the effects of multiple stressors and look for solutions to protect, monitor, manage, restore, adapt maybe to ecosystems and their biodiversity. Knowledge about sustainably feeding the world's population, so it's around ocean food. It's about equitable and sustainable development of the ocean economy. So how can we develop a blue-green economy in a sustainable way? The 5th element speaks about this nexus of ocean and climate that I know you're working quite a lot on. Thinking about multi-hazard warning systems for safety for coastal communities, but also protecting ecosystems. We certainly need an ocean observing system, information system that is fit for purpose. And how we can develop that with new tools, new technologies, new ideas. develop a comprehensive and digital representation of the ocean. I talked about this digital twin as one of the ways to do that and make this a multi-stakeholder, equitable frame. And then certainly most important, I think, for around the globe is how can we really develop and share capacity and capabilities to access the data, information, knowledge, technology, kind of the ocean across all aspects of ocean science. And that needs to be accessible for all, rich, poor, indigenous, academics and alike. And last but not least, I think that's probably the hardest of all for us in academia as well as society. How can we identify these barriers to sustainable development, these barriers to sustainable interactions with human and ocean? It's about greed, it's about power, money flows and alike. And I think we also can do some academic work on that. This is maybe more an economic, social sciences agenda, but a very important one. So a few words to close. The decade is a framework of action. I'm not going to talk much about it other than showing these pictures, because I think the decade is not for people like my generation, the old folks. It's the next generation. It's empowering the early careers, the next generation scientists, which I know you have a lot. I see some of them here in the Zoom window. It's really to make your work, your life profitable. And so that's what the decade is really trying to support. There's ways in which it does it. There's programs, project activities. I won't bore you with some of the implementation details. Happy to answer questions on that. So what's important for me to get across that this is a decade for everybody, right? So it connects the ocean sciences, business and industry, civil society, foundations, sustainable development policymakers, the public at large, and in particular also early career ocean professionals. A few desirables that I won't dwell much on. We know our science is largely competent for problem diagnostic. We want solutions. We have an observing system for climate. We really want it properly cutting across. We have major knowledge gaps and weak in ocean literacy around the globe. So we're looking for actually a well-literate society everywhere on our planet. The funding that we get is mostly in research-based. We really want value change commitments, also long-term funding and engagement for that. And I don't have to tell you that we have hugely uneven capacities and capabilities around the globe. And so we need to work on that together. So I'm going to give you just one more example. For us, we have a lot of great experience from a country like Germany, which is cold and focusing on European issues, to working with our African colleagues in Cape Verde. And we're learning so much from them, how they see the ocean, how they want to understand the ocean, how they want to use the ocean. And it's just a fantastic exchange of ideas and values that we do. And we work with them on observing systems in the regions, but also trying to see how we can bring our knowledge together that they have, that we have, for a prosperous future for them and for us. And we also do it on the educational side. We have a master's program with African scientists, and it's just fantastic to see these next generation scientists, to see all the bright ideas they have, all the engagement, ambition they bring forward. And I just get so much energy when I go to Cape Verde and work with the colleagues there. So just one of these things that is so important to us in the decade. So my last slide here, colleagues, is I think there are some reasons for maybe despair, but maybe there's more reason for being optimistic. I think if we work together and really look at the ocean in new ways, we can really understand the ocean better. We can understand the processes. We can predict better what's coming our way. And that way, really be smart about acting, smart about governing human-ocean interactions, and really come up with that solutions that allow us to use the ocean space going forward as a humanity in a sustainable way. So it is good for us and our generation, but also for the generations to come. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very, very much for this beautiful talk. I will soon pass to Andrea, coordinate the interactions with the audience, but I'd like to comment, actually, ask you a question on your digital twins model that I suppose it's all based on the observation system, the observation data that you have, or the world have collected for many years, but I suppose it's adaptive as new data is collected, you adjust the model, but the political component is unpredictable and I suppose is not there. How do you manage with that?
Yeah, so let me be very clear on that. So what we're promoting is what we call a framework, right? So of digital twins, plural, of the ocean. I have no ambition to imagine that there will be one digital ocean that is fit for purpose around the globe. I think will never happen. And I think it's not desirable. So what I'm thinking of, what do we need to do to empower your community in your region of the world and your university to actually use all the information that exists locally in your academic network with your societal partners and maybe globally by global models, global data systems, to specifically ask questions that you have. So to me, the digital twins of the oceans is really more like a conceptual thing. And we have some experience on that. For example, a good example are Earth system models. They're informed by data, but they're not just data, they're also using understanding built into it. And some of the Earth system models that Mauricio and others are working on, they allowed us to say, okay, if CO2 goes up by that much, probably the ocean will warm, probably the sea level will rise. That's helpful, right? So now I want to take that idea and put it into your lagoon and ask the question, okay, here's a lagoon or an estuary area of where you are. And there are some ideas about, managing the river flow or building new protected areas or maybe increasing tourism. And what would that mean to that lagoon's ecosystem functions, right? It will change for sure, but in what way? Is it net positive maybe for the people around? Is it a net negative, or are there winners and losers? And how can we use that information for our marine spatial planning efforts, that we maybe say, well, maybe that protected area needs to be a bit larger, or maybe it needs to be somewhere else, or maybe the tourism development should be focusing here and not there. So I think we're using these digital twins as what if scenario. You play out future scenarios and you work with our decision makers and say, okay, if you want to do this or that or something else, this allows you to forecast a bit possible outcomes before we get the disasters, right? And I think that's the idea. So I don't want it to be seen as the bells and whistles, everything for everybody. It's much more focused. And sometimes you don't need bells and whistles for some of those decisions. Sometimes very simple things in a conceptual digital twin can be extremely illuminating. But quite often you will say, well, I wish I know better. And then you will probably get more motivation to maybe increase your observing system, to improve your understanding, to get better models and alike. But I think the one important element to that, in order for it to be useful, it has to be also in some ways accessible for your managers, right? For people in government, people in the business sector, the NGOs. So it cannot be a highly end expert system that only PhDs of some global university know how to deal with. And that's what's exciting about it. So how can we take that information and make it accessible sort of for normal people? And I think digital technology allows you to do that. That is possible, right? It's just, we can work with the gaming industry and many other actors in that space. It's really exciting. And there's a lot of experience in the engineering community, in particular around infrastructure. They have digital twins of all the stuff that they built. And we can use that ideas and concept and turn it into a digital twin of an environmental stuff, right? So I think it's really exciting, Eduardo. And actually, I think it's a combination of low tech and high tech. And it's really interesting challenge for informatics, for some of your colleagues around. And I really think it's a very exciting frame to operate in, but and you can do it at home. And the idea would be with this digital program to enable these elements. What do you need to make that working for you? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think Mauricio has the hands raised, right, Andrea? Can you confirm that?
Yes. As Mauricio, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Martin, thanks very much for the presence here, for supporting our international program. That's very important for us, and I'm really glad that you were able to be with us this afternoon. And thanks very much for this overarching talk, which was really interesting. And a question that has risen a lot in my classes, and which I try to concentrate here in an extract to ask you, is that recently we have the new IPCC report, you know, the first part of the IPCC report that came out, right? And do you think that if that changes in any way the perspective of ocean research in midterm and long term, do you think that we have to adjust from what we learned on that report, on the new information that came in? What's your views on that?
Yeah. So Mauricio, great to see you, and a great question, a very easy one, obviously. No. Let me answer two ways. I will say that the special report on ocean and cryosphere, which came out 18 months ago, in some sense is extremely informative, in particular for the marine agenda as it connects to climate. But also the 1.5 degree special report, but also the latest one, has, I think, shown a few things which are a little bit new kids on the block. First, I mean, you know, it's my community, your community, Maurice, so we'll miss the program in a while. But what I really liked about this particular report is two elements. First, they went in addition to the consensus view, which is extremely important, but they also included a bit more a wider view, saying there are some scenarios under climate change which are maybe not very likely, but very undesirable. A new element of these runaway climate issues and so on. And it's very possible these things are more likely to happen at a regional scale or local scale than globally. So, but I think by acknowledging that, that's been helpful. The second thing, which I like that recent report on, it puts much more emphasis on some of the elements of the issues around heat waves, which I know some of your colleagues have worked on, which also have been plaguing your coast, which isn't so much influencing the global climate, right? So from our first assessments, we were more focused on the global climate driver, you know, and so it's maybe something you want to worry about, but anything smaller scale, not so much. But I'm very pleased to see that this regional aspects of climate change and how they're affecting us are coming in a bit more prominently. I think that's a very good development. And I think we will see in report 2 and 3, which we don't know what they look like, but I'm kind of foreshadowing that a bit from the special reports, that the IPCC is also turning a bit more attention towards the action orientation of it. So in the first couple of years, we were more about what is the climate today? It has it changed in the past, and how will it change in the future? So we've established that. So now it's more important. So what does that actually mean? So they're much more open to issues around adaptation and mitigation, and they're also opening up the door for some of the interventions that we might or might not like. So I think these are some of the new elements that are come in, and you've seen it, and I'm sure also in your own research, that intervention thinking will take more room as we go forward. I'm not a huge fan on global interventions, don't get me wrong, but at the regional scale, we're doing it already, sometimes not even knowing what the consequences are. So this is where this digital twinning can help, you know, safeguarding our interventions. But it also raises other issues about, you know, what is the social license to operate? You know, can we do whatever we want in the climate system or ocean system? And the IPCC is just starting to open up that door a bit more, which I think is good. But I think fundamentally, and you would probably agree with me, Mauricio, I mean, things a bit better and so on, but there's not like a new topic that all of a sudden in this assessment showed up that we didn't know about 10 years ago. That is because climate science is a well-established science, and in some ways we know some more elements of the climate science than I would say for ocean science, ocean understanding there. I mean, when you go into the biosphere, when you go into some of the deeper ocean, there's so much to be discovered, things that we don't even know halfway. So I would almost say the ocean and climate connection in some sense is a bit more advanced than some of the other areas that we have in ocean sciences. And it's important for me to lift up these other areas so we can have these assessments cutting across the ocean sphere, and because we are messing not only with the climate, we're messing with the biogeochemistry, with the ecology, and we should do that in a smart way rather than in a I hope it's going to go well way.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Someone wants to do a question, please? Can use the chat. Or...
So I'm hoping that Margaret or Susanna or some of the early careers will have a great question for me. If you don't speak great English, do it in Portuguese, and I'm sure Andrea will be happy to translate.
Okay. Can I talk?
Yes, Margaret, you
Yeah.
have the word.
Hello. Let me try the camera here. Hello, Martin. Yeah, we have met in 2000, personally in 2010, I think, in a school, in a summer school in Brest. You remember me? Yes, the presentation about the Patos Lagoon history. Martin, my question is more.
I can see you perfectly well, Margaret. It's great to see you. Yes.
Nice to meet you. See you again. And it's a great pleasure to have you as our international guru here in this PrInt program. I always, when I talk to students in classroom or in lectures, there's always this question about, do you still have hope? We still have time. We do have time to change what is the provisions for the next years. So taking into account the last IPCC reports, including the 1.5 report, the SROC, the ocean and the cryosphere and the climate, and the last one where was conveyed influence of the human on the climate. What do you think for the next 10 years? What do you have to tell to our students? What do you think for the next 10 years? Because the time is over. We are getting close to our deadline where we should have improve these and decrease, make adjustments to decrease the temperature in the world. And so it's very complicated because the countries, we are not moving forward towards that everybody knows here. Any country in the world, there are few countries that are changing their style of life in the carbon economy to change that. What do you think your person as a Martin, as your personal beliefs, experience, and as academic, what do you think about that? And plus, in terms of the next years, there is also this bioengineering solutions that a few years ago we thought that would be crazy. I have been participating in some workshops about that. I would think it was too crazy because we are dealing with changing the biogeochemistry in lots of things in the world. But we are getting very close to our time. And I know that's a very complicated question, but we need to address that as a scientist.
So Margaret, thank you very much for asking that question. It's great to see you. I do know we had a summer school together, but I think it is a question that I get a lot, I mean, directly or indirectly, and I think all of us in some ways do, right? And I think it's a bit of a question of personality and, you know, glass half full, half empty is what they say in English speaking. So let me make a few points. First, the first point you asked, Margaret, is there urgency? I think the answer is clearly yes, right? I mean, by just saying, let's just wait 10 years until we have better solution, that is not a good strategy, right? And that has been very clear. This has been clear already 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean it's not still valid, right? So that's the first thing. Is it urgent? Yes. I will say that despite slow progress, there's hardly any government on this planet who would say it's not a problem. Nobody says that, right? They all acknowledge that climate and climate change is a problem. Where they don't agree on is what to do. But that is a success. 20 years ago, there were at least half of the governments on the planet who were basically saying it's not a problem, we don't have to even discuss that. That is gone. And that is a huge success of groups like IPCC, yourself, the work of the academic community, but not just. The NGOs, civil society is on board, as well as industry, actually. So I think there's a large recognition that that is a challenge. I think that is a first very important step, right? It's a bit like, okay, I know I'm sick, right? In the beginning, you say, I'm not sick, I'm just have a bad day or whatever, right? It's too hot and so on. So now okay, I have a problem, right? So I think that's a good starting point. And I think that has changed. I think so now the question is it too late? I mean, it depends what too means, right? It is late, but never too late, because, and that's what the 1.5 degree report clearly showed. It's hugely ambitious. We really have to cut down on our carbon. We have to shift our energy systems globally. And first and foremost, countries like my own, and including academic community. But I think that's clear. So action is needed. On the other hand, it is also global action needed. Some of the big polluters, let's say, or the carbon intensive societies like mine, we need to do work. But there's also parts of our world which will be more affected by climate change than others. We're all in the same climate change world, but it does play out differently. And so I think this is a statement about adaptation. So it's about a statement. So let's say sea level is rising. I mean, there's not a single scenario where sea level will be not rising another 0.5 meter, right? I mean, there's not a single, that is already done, right? So that means we cannot undo that. That means we need to adjust to that, right? But the world is not going to stop because sea level is rising. It just makes it very difficult. And maybe for a lot of people, that's going to be very hard. So the academic challenge now for us is, how do we deal with that, right? What is a good solution? And there's different solutions for different regions. It's great science on that adaptation side. And then the third element is on despair. So when you're sick, you can either say, give up, okay, I'm done, or you say, no, I don't want to be done. I think I can do something about it, right? I can still, put that disease to a small part of myself and still have a livable life that is quite enjoyable. And I think it's that optimism, I think that is important. And the most important realization for our students is they can do something. And indeed they can, because their science will inform the kind of actions we take: mitigation, adaptation, intervention. It's their work with the community to really say it is urgent, but not hopeless. But I do worry that some of our colleagues, but also around the planet, they play this doomsday or everything is lost scenario so much. Actually, I don't think there's evidence for that, but emotionally, it gives you so much stress that some of our students, I've seen it in our students, with the pandemic on top of that, they have the pandemic debacle, and then we tell them climate change is unmanageable, the world is going to go bad. That is not helping anybody. I don't think it's actually factually true. So what I'm trying to do is empowerment, right? So what I want to work with the students is that you can do something, even in your own quarter, but you can also bring about systemic change. It's not only your own lifestyle, it's how can you make your city more energy efficient? It's not about turning light off yourself. It's about supporting those around you who might have less knowledge, less capabilities, less technology, less societal agency or power. So it's that element, Margaret, that I'm trying to teach my students, work on a small project, bring about change and be proud of it. And now imagine if we all would do that, things can happen. And then the last thing I always say, think about calendars, right? I mean, Margaret, when you and I were a little bit younger, we had paper calendars where you would write your dates in, right? Now we all have on phones. If you would have told us 10 years ago, we won't have paper calendars anymore, everything is on a smartphone, we would have looked at each other and said, that's naive, right? Calendars won't go away so quickly. And all of a sudden they do, right? So we've seen rapid transformation around digitalization in our societies, huge uptake. And so I don't see why we cannot have similar type of rapid transformations on energy systems, right? So we got to harness the same. And why is it? Because we think gadgets are cool. You know, we love the digital. I mean, they can get deleted. I lost a whole calendar once, no fun. I wish I had my paper calendar, but you work on that. So I think I'm trying to look into other futures which are different to where we are today for sure, but that doesn't mean they're not livable and they're not desirable. And I think the idea is to get that agency to provide that expert knowledge to really shape the future so it's most desirable. Yeah, it's not perfect. We will be all a little bit sick, but we're all sick all the time. That doesn't kill us, and we still have a good life, right? So that's why I do it. But I think it's an extremely important point, and also in our teaching, to, as I said, we're focusing a lot on the pressures of the environment because that's how we grow up. But I'm in my teaching always try to bring in this resilience element, sort of how can we use the science that we have to prepare society to make it resilient, to look for good outcomes. And you can give an example of a bad outcome and you can give an example of a great outcome. And I've seen it changes the perception of our students dramatically. All of a sudden they see a ray of agency, a ray of hope, a ray of I can do something, rather than it's all hopeless and despair. And thanks for asking that question, Margaret. I think it's so important. We call this narratives, right? So what narrative are we subscribing to in our own teaching about ocean and climate? And I'm trying to subscribe to a narrative of prosperity. And I'm using the narrative of pressures and doom at times, but largely the narrative of prosperity.
Oh, great. I'm very happy with your answer because I'm trying to do that with the students as well. But sometimes it's hard when you actually read and you read the last report. It's so sometimes there's this feeling of despair. Just to remind you, what do you think about the second, my second question about the use of the bioengineering, the big bioengineering solutions that they are planning for the planet? What do you think about that? And do you think that we will need that?
Yeah, so it's another question. Sorry, Margaret, I should have covered on that as well. So let me answer it this way. I mean, Brazil is a great country, much more better than Germany. If you look at I'm using a terrestrial example for a moment. We're marine scientists, but let me just do terrestrial. In my country, in Germany, there's not a single piece of land that you could claim is natural. Not a single thing, right? We went through at least 4 different type of land use change environments over the last 1,000 years. That's just because we're so many people in Europe and we're such a small place. Brazil is a great example where you see this unfold in real time. You do still have parts of the Brazilian environment is in an ecological, natural desire state, meaning that human intervention haven't shaped the landscape. The landscape evolved with humans being part of it, but not the decisive force, right? There's Amazon and some other areas that you have. But on the other hand, you see that on land, we have switched from being gatherers and hunters, and you in your country have still some communities which are gatherers and hunters in the rainforest that are from, for Germans, that's, whoa, that is ancient, well, it's reality in Brazil, to a society on land, which is more about agriculture. So we're using the ecosystem and manipulating it in the way we want it to be. So we grow certain things for our food security. So this has been good and bad, right? It's been good because that environment is safer for humans, it's productive and all of that. But it's also bad because it's not a natural environment. It's probably prone to diseases and some issues. And I think in the ocean space, we're still a bit more like in some parts of the Amazon, it's more the wild ocean. But in the coast, we're already moving into the harvested, cultivated, agricultural type ocean. And I think in the ocean, we'll have the same pluses and minuses that we have on land, right? So some things are good about agriculture and some things are terrible. But there's no choice. I mean, we cannot go back with that many people on the planet to a world where everything is just like in the middle of the Amazon. So I think we have to sort of see how to make the best of it. But on the other hand, we have so many experiences where our good intentions about doing something in the ecosystem turn out really bad, right? So Australia, you introduce new animals that take over, they really mess up the ecosystem. So any of these interventions have to be really, you know, this is dangerous stuff. I mean, this can have a lot of impact. It doesn't mean we're not doing it, but we've got to be smart about it. So you think about no regret strategies, you know, you don't go full out for BECCS. It's crazy. You know, you got to be smart about it. You've seen it in Brazil about your energy systems on biofuels. You know, you go full out biofuels, you see the debacle that comes with it. So I think really working on solutions a bit more carefully, thinking about side effects and so on is probably the better way to go. So I think it's probably unavoidable to some degree, but I'm not a big fan of full out technology, full intervention, because unless we understand the side effects, and I think I'll be the first and you be the first to say, we don't understand what these things all will do. And this is why I'm a big fan of the digital twinning kind of things, because at least it allows you to somewhat look at the bigger picture rather than some optimistic engineering calculations, oh, we do BECCS and CO2 will drop. I'm not convinced that that's true. Same for upwelling in the ocean. Was a great paper came out last week on that one and so on. So many of these engineering fixes are interesting. I think we should look at them, but we should look at them from the what would be the world like if we did it, rather than yay, that's the solution, right? That's a different thing. Do it reflective, study them, and then come up with the pros and the cons, and then bring that back to our society and say, do you really want to do that? Or are there better ways of doing it? And I mean, we know what the best ways are, right? Recycling, renewable energies, you know, not so much pollution, but they're not always the easiest ones. So that negotiation needs to be done. So personally, I have a lot of doubt that these are the ways to go, but I'm a huge fan of science along those lines, because it's only through science that we get to look at the whole impacts that potentially come our way so that we can make informed decisions. I'm not saying that scientists should tell government what to do, but I think as scientists, we have the responsibility to lay out the options and lay out the positives, lay out the negatives, and then collectively you have to navigate that space and decide what are we willing to accept on the negatives and for what price do we going to get the positives.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much.
We have one last question from the chat here, and then I invite you after that, if you have time, we are going to have presentations from students that took advantage of this program and went abroad to finish their PhD or to complete part of their PhD abroad, and they are related to this subject that we're discussing. So feel free, and I read this last question.
Yeah, I see it, Eduardo. We can save
you
the
can
time.
say
I can read it. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
okay.
So I think it's a great question. So what can scientists do to engage society as a whole? And I think this is a question which is something I'm very interested in. So what is the role of Margaret, Eduardo, myself in society? And what is the contract that we have? So I think they're giving us funds, we hope more, and they're giving us license to operate. They want to hear from us what we find out. So in some ways, there's a certain engagement of society with us that we fund universities, researchers, and alike. But on the other hand, I think it is important for us to realize that that's a privilege, right? We've been giving resources from our society to do whatever we enjoy doing and to understand the ocean, the climate system. But I think with that privilege comes the responsibility that we somehow collectively have to give back to society. And that is that engagement element. So I think it means wherever, at schools, in your family, at church, community-based, whatever, I think we do have a responsibility to pay back some of the benefits that we got from society. And if you do that and have an open mind to that, not lecturing, you need to do this, you need to do that, that's not what I'm saying. You just say, look, thanks for allowing me to do my science. This is what I found out. It's kind of complicated. We do this and that and something else. And in that sense, sometimes you can actually entrain some of our fellow citizens, people from government, industry, and civil society, and have discussions like that with them. I think that is the best way to engage science. Why? because they will understand that Margaret is actually a nice person and Eduardo is serious, right? He's not in it for the money because we don't earn so much. You're in it for the knowledge, right? And actually that builds up what we call trust, right? That they will say, well, if Eduardo says, maybe you got to be a bit careful here, that probably rings a bell with them, because they say he's not going to make money out of it. You know, why should he say something good or bad if he doesn't think it's true? So that element of credibility is really important. And I think we can harness that by being constantly where we can in contact with the society around us, so they see that we're operating for them, that we're working for us as a community, and then they're more interested in hearing us out. And again, they don't want to hear us out in the sense that you must do this, and they want to hear you out as, what if I did that, Margaret? Is that a good idea? Or, yeah, Margaret, I have this problem. Can you help me? That kind of. So he'll keep an eye and ears open to their thoughts and then work with them through some of the solutions. I think that is the best way to engage society. And they can become part in the scientific endeavor. They can be part of literacy. There's many, many opportunities, and all of you have some of them. I would encourage you in the program to really make use of that low level, right? I'm not talking about the highest level of government. Wherever you are, engage with your family, friends, society. That's the best way to do it, because then we can show to society that the scientific community is actually wanting to help, right? It's not here to give you bad news. It's here to work with us for a better future. And it will also help with some of the issues that we see in the pandemic, right? Is if countries which have that arrangement tend to be better off, because society says, okay, I guess if they say that, maybe I should think about that. And in other countries, science are somehow seen as supporting whatever agendas that they don't like, and then they don't want to listen to the scientific advice or scientific outcomes, and that's not so optimal, right? But I think we can do something about it by really being approachable, trying to be neutral, trying to be listening, understanding. That would be my advice. It's a great question. Thank you.